The last human battleship exploded in a brilliant flash of white light against the darkness of space, and Commander Sarah Chen watched from the observation deck of Luna Base as another piece of humanity's defense turned to scattered debris and burning metal fragments that drifted slowly past the lunar surface like fallen stars. The Confederation fleet filled the sky above Earth with thousands of alien vessels from 100 different worlds, and all of them had come with one purpose: to end humanity forever and claim the Sol system as their prize for winning this war that had lasted 30 brutal years. Sarah pressed her hand against the cold glass and stared at Earth below, where the atmosphere already glowed orange from the orbital bombardment, and she knew that billions of people down there had only hours left before the planet became uninhabitable for generations to come behind. The command center buzzed with frantic activity as officers shouted coordinates and damage reports and desperate pleas for reinforcements that would never come because there were no reinforcements left and the last carrier group had been destroyed 4 hours ago near Mars. Commander, we have incoming transmission from the Zrathi flagship, Lieutenant Park said from his station, and his voice cracked with exhaustion and barely contained fear. Sarah turned away from the window and straightened her uniform, even though it was torn and stained with blood from the earlier attack, when debris had punched through the base's outer hull and killed 17 people in Section C. Put it through, she said. The main view screen flickered to life. An Admiral Kresh of the Zrathi Empire appeared with his 4 eyes gleaming with satisfaction, and his mandibles clicking in. What Sarah had learned was their expression of triumph. Commander Chun, I am transmitting the Confederation's final terms for your surrender, Kresh said in his translated voice that sounded like grinding metal. Your fleet is destroyed and your world burns, and within 12 hours Earth will be completely sterilized and all human colonies in this system will be occupied, and your species will exist only as a footnote in galactic history. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest, but she kept her face expressionless because she wouldn't give this alien the satisfaction of seeing her break. What are your terms? She asked. Kresh's mandibles clicked faster, and Sarah recognized it as laughter. Unconditional surrender of all remaining human forces and full cooperation with Confederation occupation, and all human survivors will be relocated to labor camps on the outer colonies, where your species will serve the Confederation until you prove yourselves worthy of limited autonomy. The command center went silent, and every officer turned to look at Sarah because they all knew what those terms really meant. Slavery at best and slow extinction at worst. Sarah thought about her daughter Maya, who was 8 years old and currently on one of the evacuation ships, fleeing toward the outer system, and she thought about her husband, David, who had died 6 months ago when the defense station at Jupiter fell, and she thought about every human being who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them. No, Sarah said, quiet like Kresh's eyes narrowed, and his posture shifted to something that might have been confusion. You refuse, he said, and his tone suggested he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. I refuse, Sarah confirmed, and then she smiled, and it was not a kind smile. You think you've won because you destroyed our fleet and burned our homeworld, but you don't understand what you've really done here today. Enlighten me, Commander, Kresh said with obvious amusement. Sarah leaned forward, and her smile widened. You've reminded us what we really are, and you've taken away everything we had to lose, and you've given us every reason to survive no matter what the cost. She gestured to Lieutenant Park, who brought up a tactical display showing dozens of evacuation ships and supply vessels and civilian transports, all fleeing in different directions toward the edges of the solar system and beyond. See those ships, Admiral. And every one of them carries humans who will remember what you did here, and they'll tell their children and their children's children, and we will survive in the dark places where you won't think to look, and we will adapt, and we will learn, and one day we will come back. Kresh made a dismissive gesture with one of his 4 arms. Scattered refugees fleeing into the void, and you'll die slowly in the cold and dark, and in 50 years. No one will even remember humanity existed. Maybe, Sarah said. Or maybe you just made the worst mistake in Confederation history. She nodded to Park again, and he entered the authorization code that Sarah had hoped she would never need to use. What are you doing? Kresh demanded as his instruments apparently detected the energy spike activating protocol midnight. Sarah said, every database and every technological specification and every military secret and cultural archive humanity ever created is being transmitted to those evacuation ships, right? Now, along with complete intelligence on Confederation weaknesses and tactical doctrines that we learned during 30 years of fighting you. The transmission bars on the tactical display climbed steadily toward completion. You're giving your survivors everything they need to rebuild, Kresh said, and for the first time, Sarah heard uncertainty in his voice. Better than that, Sarah said. I'm giving them something to fight for and the knowledge they need to win, and humans are very good at winning. When you give us enough time and motivation, we will hunt them down, Kresh threatened. You'll try, Sarah agreed. But space is big. Admiral and humans are adaptable and patient, and we hold grudges for a very long time. The transmission reached 100%, and Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, because she had done everything she could, and now humanity's future was in the hands of the survivors, fleeing into the unknown. This conversation is over, Kresh said. Your base will be destroyed in 10 minutes, and I suggest you use that time to make peace with whatever gods your primitive species believes in. The view screen went dark, and Sarah turned to face her officers who were all watching her with expressions that mixed fear and hope and grim determination. You all know what happens next, Sarah said. Anyone who wants to evacuate to the lower levels and try to survive the bombardment can go now, and I won't think less of you. No one moved. Lieutenant Park stood up from his station and saluted. Permission to remain at my post, Commander. Granted, Sarah said, and her voice was thick with emotion. One by one, the other officers stood and saluted, and Sarah returned each salute with the precision and respect they deserved, because these people had stayed loyal to humanity even when defeat was certain. Thank you, Sarah said simply, all of you. She walked back to the observation window and looked out at Earth one last time, and she thought about all the beautiful things humans had created and all the terrible things they had survived throughout their history. And she knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the end. The Confederation thought they had won, but they had only accomplished something far more dangerous. They had united humanity against a common enemy and given them unlimited time to prepare their revenge. Sarah saw the first flash of weapons fire from the Confederation fleet, and she closed her eyes and smiled, because somewhere out in the darkness beyond the solar system, her daughter Maya was alive and carrying humanity's future forward into the unknown. Blast wave hit Luna base and tore it apart in seconds, but Sarah Chun died knowing that she had given her species one last gift: hope and the determination to never give up no matter how long the night lasted. The debris field above Earth's burning atmosphere, the last human transmissions faded to static, but they had already reached the fleeing evacuation ships where thousands of survivors received protocol Midnight's data and began the long journey into exile. Confederations celebrated their victory and divided humanity's worlds among themselves and built monuments to their triumph over the aggressive young species that had dared to challenge galactic order. They thought it was over, but they had forgotten to check for bodies, and they had forgotten that humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars and extinction events before they had forgotten what humans really were. Survivors who never forgot and never forgave, and always came back. 50 years had passed since Earth burned, and the Confederation had nearly forgotten that humans ever existed except as cautionary tales told the young cadets about the dangers of expansionist primitive species who reached for the stars before They were ready. The Sol system belonged to the Zrathi Empire now, and they had built massive mining stations around the dead planets and extracted resources with brutal efficiency and turned humanity's former homeworld into a museum or alien. Tourists could walk through preserved human cities frozen in the moment of their destruction on Zrath Prime. The Emperor kept a human skull on his desk as a paperweight, and sometimes he would pick it up and marvel at how such a fragile species had caused the Confederation so much trouble before being properly eliminated. But in the darkness between stars, something was growing. Maya Chun was 58 years old now, and she stood on the bridge of the wandering station called Haven 7 and watched as another generation ship rendezvoused with their small fleet in the emptiness of interstellar space, far from any star or planet where sensors might detect them. "Captain, we have confirmed docking with the vessel Perseverance," her first officer reported. "They're carrying 2,000 refugees from the outer colonies who escaped Confederation labor camps." Maya nodded and felt a familiar mixture of satisfaction and sorrow, because every human they rescued was a victory, but also a reminder of how many remained enslaved or dead. "Have medical teams ready and prepare quarters in Section 8, Maya ordered, "and send word to the Council that we'll need additional food rations allocated." Haven 7 was one of 43 known human stations scattered throughout the galaxy, and each one housed between 5,000 and 15,000 survivors who had spent the last 5 decades hiding and adapting and preparing for something that most of them would never live to see: the return to Earth. The stations were built inside hollowed asteroids and derelict ships, and even a few captured Confederation vessels that had been carefully modified to avoid detection, and each station was completely self-sufficient because the first rule of survival was never depend on anything you couldn't control. Maya walked through the corridors of Haven 7 and past hydroponic gardens where engineers worked to maximize food production in minimal space, and fabrication workshops where metallurgists refined techniques for building weapons and ship components from salvaged materials, and schools where children learned mathematics and history and warfare in equal measure. Every child born in exile knew the story of Earth's fall and Commander Sarah Chun's sacrifice and Protocol Midnight's promise, and they grew up with a purpose that united them more strongly than any planetary population. Remember Survive returning the Central Assembly Hall. Maya met with the Haven Council, which consisted of representatives from each major department, and they gathered around a holographic display showing the scattered positions of known human populations throughout the galaxy. "Report from Haven 23, said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who managed their intelligence network. They successfully infiltrated a Confederation research facility on Kelvor 4 and downloaded complete technical specifications for the new Zrathi shield generators." Maya leaned forward with interest because information was their most valuable resource, and every piece of Confederation technology they acquired brought them closer to evening the odds when the time finally came to fight back. "How many casualties?" Maya asked. "None," Yuki replied with a slight smile. "Our people got in and out without being detected, and the Confederation still has no idea that human operatives are actively working throughout their territory. This was humanity's greatest advantage. The Confederation thought they were extinct, so they never looked for human infiltrators or suspected sabotage when systems mysteriously failed or data disappeared from secure facilities over 50 years. Humanity had evolved from a conventional military force into something far more dangerous, a distributed network of intelligence operatives and saboteurs and engineers who studied their enemies with patient obsession. "What about the Perseverance refugees?" asked Marcus Rivera, who commanded Haven 7's security forces. "Can any of them fight?" 17 have military experience, Yuki said, "but most are civilians who survived labor camps through cunning rather than combat skills." "Then we train them," Marcus said firmly. Every human needs to know how to fight, because when we finally move against the Confederation, we'll need every person ready. Maya listened to the discussion and thought about her mother Sarah, who had died giving humanity this chance to survive. And she wondered what her mother would think of what they had become. They weren't the same species that had built cities on Earth and dreamed peacefully about exploring the cosmos, and they had been forged in the fires of genocide into something harder and more focused and utterly dedicated to a single purpose. The children born in exile had never seen a planet's surface and never felt natural sunlight and never known the luxury of security, but they could navigate zero gravity before they could walk and could field strip a plasma rifle by age 12 and could recite Confederation tactical doctrines in 6 different languages. We've also received disturbing intelligence from our operatives in the Kelthra sector. Yuki continued. The Confederation is planning to expand their labor camp system and bring in more subject species for forced resource extraction. The council chamber went quiet because this was exactly the kind of atrocity that made their blood boil, but also presented a strategic opportunity. Then we helped them escape, Maya said, just like we've been doing for 50 years, and every refugee we liberate becomes another soldier in our cause, and every successful operation teaches us more about Confederation security protocols. Captain, some of the other havens are pushing for more aggressive action, Marcus said carefully. Haven 31 wants to begin open strikes against Confederation targets instead of just intelligence gathering and sabotage. Maya shook her head. Not yet, and we're not ready for open warfare, and the moment we reveal ourselves to Confederation, we'll mobilize their full military against us. But we can't hide forever, Marcus argued. We've been preparing for 5 decades, and at some point we have to actually fight back. We are fighting back, Maya said firmly. Every piece of intelligence we gather and every refugee we rescue and every system we sabotage weakens them and strengthens us. And when we finally strike, it will be with overwhelming force and perfect coordination. She brought up a different display showing a timeline that extended another 15 years into the future. This is our projected readiness date, Maya said. 15 more years to complete our fleet construction and finish infiltrating key Confederation systems and position our operatives where they can do maximum damage. 65 years total, Yuki said softly. Most of the people who escaped Earth will be dead by then. I know, Maya said, and her voice was heavy with the weight of command. But we're not doing this for ourselves, and we're doing this for every human who died when Earth burned, and for every child born in exile who deserves to see their homeworld, and for every generation that will come after us. The council members nodded because they all understood that this was bigger than any individual life or even any single generation, and this was about ensuring that humanity survived and remembered and eventually reclaimed their place among the stars. After the meeting, Maya returned to her quarters, which were sparse and functional like everything else on Haven 7, and she pulled out a small metal box that she had carried with her since childhood. Inside was a photograph of her mother, Commander Sarah Chun, standing on Earth before the war and wearing a bright smile that Maya had only seen in pictures, because by the time Maya was old enough to remember, her mother had already been hardened by years of combat also. In the box was a sample of Earth soil sealed in a clear container and a data chip containing her mother's last message that had been transmitted as part of Protocol Midnight. Maya had watched that message 1,000 times, but she played it again. Now her mother's face appeared on the small screen, looking tired and determined. To whoever receives this, and you carry humanity's future now, and the Confederation thinks they've destroyed us, but they've only scattered us, and scattered things are harder to kill, and they grow back stronger. Remember what we were, and remember what they did, and when the time comes, make them remember what humans really are. Maya closed her eyes and whispered to the empty room. We remember, Mother, and we're almost ready. In 42 other hidden stations scattered across the galaxy, similar scenes played. Out as humans prepared and trained and planned, and waited for the day when they would emerge from the darkness and remind the Confederation that extinction and exile are very different things. The Zrathi Emperor picked up his human skull paperweight and smiled at his reflection in its polished surface, and never suspected that humanity was watching him through the eyes of servants and technicians and officials who looked like loyal Confederation citizens, but secretly served a very different. Cause space was vast, and the Confederation controlled thousands of worlds. But humans had learned to thrive in the spaces between and in the shadows, and in the forgotten corners where no one thought to look. They had survived, and very soon they would show the galaxy what that really meant. Admiral Kresh was reviewing supply reports in his flagship above the dead world that humans had once called Mars when every screen in his command center suddenly went dark and emergency lights bathed the bridge in red. Illumination. Report. Kresh barked at his tactical officer, who was frantically working at a console that refused to respond to commands. Unknown Admiral, and all primary systems are offline, and backup power is failing, and communications are down across the entire fleet. Kresh felt something cold settle in his stomach, because in 40 years of military service, he had never seen a simultaneous system failure of this magnitude. "Get me a status report from the other vessels," he ordered. "I can't, sir," and all communication systems are dead. Then the screens flickered back to life, but instead of showing tactical displays, they showed a simple message in both Zrathi script and Universal Standard. "Remember EART." The message stayed on screen for exactly 10 seconds before the systems crashed again, and when they came back online, Kresh's tactical officer made a sound that might have been fear. "Admiral, we have multiple distress signals and orbital station Gamma above Earth just went offline, and Station Delta is reporting massive explosions, and the mining facility on Luna is gone completely destroyed." Kresh's 4 hands gripped his command chair, because this was impossible, and humanity was extinct and scattered. Refugees couldn't coordinate attacks across multiple systems simultaneously. "How many attacks?" Kresh demanded. "Counting now, Admiral," the tactical officer said, and his voice shook as more reports flooded in. 17 no, 23 no, Admiral. I'm reading confirmed attacks on 47 Confederation facilities across 19 systems, and all occurring within the same 5-minute window. The command center erupted in chaos as officers shouted contradictory orders and tried to make sense of reports that shouldn't be possible. Pulled up the galactic map and felt his blood freeze as he saw the pattern. Every facility that had been involved in Earth's destruction, or housed human prisoners, or processed resources from Sol System, had been hit with surgical precision. "This is coordinated," Kresh said quietly. "This is military action. But Admiral, humanity is extinct, and these attacks require organization and resources that scattered refugees couldn't possibly possess." Kresh thought about Commander Sarah Chun's last words 50 years ago, and how she had promised that humanity would survive and adapt and return, and he had dismissed it as the desperate defiance of a defeated enemy. "Contact Confederation Central Command," Kresh ordered. "Inform them that humanity has returned and we are under attack in the Confederation capital on Zrath Prime." The High Council convened an emergency session as reports continued to pour in from across their territory, and the scope of the attack became clear. Chancellor Vreen of the Kelphorus Dominion stood before the assembled leaders and gestured at the tactical display showing dozens of burning stations and disabled facilities. "This is unprecedented," Vreen said. "Simultaneous strikes across 100 worlds with zero prior intelligence. Warnings and complete surprise. And these are not random acts of piracy, but coordinated military operations targeting specific strategic assets." "The human extinction was confirmed," protested Senator Kraith. "We sterilized Earth and occupied there colonies and hunted down their evacuation ships for 10 years after the war ended. Apparently, we didn't hunt thoroughly enough, said General Thrax, who commanded the Confederation Defense Force. He brought up analysis of the attack patterns, and his expression was grim. These strikes bear human, tactical signatures, but evolved and refined, and whoever planned this spent decades studying our weaknesses and positioning assets throughout our territory. Are you suggesting that humans have been hiding among us for 50 years? Chancellor Vreen asked incredulously. I'm suggesting that we declared victory too soon, Thrax replied. We assumed that destroying their homeworld would break them, but humans don't break the same way other species do, and they adapt, and they remember, and apparently they've been preparing for this. Emperor Kresh, the fourth leader of the Zrathi, Empire and Supreme Commander of the Confederation military, sat on his throne and picked up the human skull that his grandfather had kept as a trophy. How many casualties? He asked quietly. Initial reports indicate minimal loss of life, General Thrax admitted. The attacks targeted infrastructure and military assets, and in several cases human operatives actually helped evacuate civilian areas before destroying the facilities. This information caused confused murmuring among the council members because genocide required hatred, but these attacks showed something more calculating. They're sending a message. Thrax continued. They could have killed thousands but chose not to, and they want us to know that they're capable of striking anywhere, and that they're choosing to show restraint. For now, added Chancellor Vreen. What do they want? Emperor Kresh asked, as if in answer every communication screen in the council chamber activated simultaneously and displayed the same image. A human woman with gray hair and hard eyes standing on what appeared to be a military bridge. I am Captain Maya Chun of the Human Expeditionary Force, the woman said in flawless, universal standard. 50 years ago, the Confederation destroyed Earth and attempted to exterminate my species, and you failed. The council chamber went silent. We have survived in exile, and we have grown stronger, and we have infiltrated every level of your society, and today's attacks demonstrate that we can strike anywhere at any time with complete impunity. Maya Shen paused, and her expression hardened. But we are not monsters, and we do not seek genocide even against those who attempted to genocide us, and we want 3 things. She held up one finger. First, formal acknowledgement from the Confederation that the destruction of Earth was an unjust act of aggression and a war crime. Second finger, full reparations for the rebuilding of Earth and restoration of the Sol system to human control. Third finger, ironclad treaties guaranteeing that no Confederation species will ever again attempt to exterminate another intelligent species. And if we refuse, Emperor Kresh said to the screen. Maya Chun smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Then what you've seen today was just a demonstration of our capabilities, and we have spent 50 years preparing for total war, and we have nothing to lose and everything to gain, and we will fight you until the Confederation collapses or humanity is truly extinct. And I think you'll find that the second outcome is significantly harder to achieve than you believed. The screen went dark. The council chamber erupted in heated debate as leaders argued about whether to negotiate or mobilize for war. We cannot bow to terrorists and demands from a defeated species, Senator Krath insisted. They're not defeated, General Thrax said flatly. That's the problem, and they've demonstrated command and control across our entire territory and intelligence penetration we didn't know was possible, and military capabilities that suggest they've been building a fleet in secret for decades. So we mobilized the full Confederation military, Krath said, and we hunt them down properly this time. With what intelligence? Thrax asked. They know our systems better than we know theirs, and they've been operating undetected for 50 years, and every servant, every technician, every dock worker could be a human agent, and we don't even know what they look like anymore. because they've probably adapted genetic modifications and surgical alterations to blend in. Emperor Kresh listened to the arguments and thought about his grandfather's trophy skull and how it had sat on their desk for 50 years as proof of humanity's defeat. He thought about Commander Sarah Chun's defiant last words and her daughter's current ultimatum, and he realized that the Confederation had made a terrible mistake. They assumed that humans were like other species, that when you broke their civilization and burned their worlds, they would accept defeat and fade quietly into history. But humans had never done what they were supposed to do. They survived ice ages when they should have frozen, and plagues when they should have died, and world wars when they should have destroyed themselves. They had climbed out of caves and built civilizations and reached for the stars despite having no natural weapons or armor or abilities that should have let them compete with stronger, faster, more naturally gifted species. The Confederation had tried to kill humanity, and instead had created something far more dangerous. A species with nothing left to lose and unlimited motivation to win. "Contact Captain Chun," Emperor Kresh said quietly. "Tell her we're willing to negotiate." "Your Majesty, we can't show weakness," Senator Kraith protested. "This isn't weakness," Kresh replied. "This is recognizing reality, and we tried to exterminate them and failed. And now they're offering terms instead of total war, and we should consider ourselves fortunate." He looked at the skull on his desk and set it down gently. "My grandfather thought this proved humanity was defeated, but it actually proved something else entirely. And it proved that even when you destroy everything they have, they survive and adapt and come back stronger. So we surrender," Kraith said with disgust. "We negotiate," Kresh corrected, "because the alternative is war against an enemy we can't find using intelligence we don't have while they sabotage us from within. And I don't like those odds." General Thrax nodded grimly. "I'll send the message." The negotiations took place on a neutral station in the outer reaches, and Captain Maya Chen walked through corridors lined with armed guards from a dozen different Confederation species, and none of them quite knew whether to treat her as a diplomat or a terrorist. The conference chamber was vast and circular, with the Confederation delegation seated on one side and Maya standing alone on the other, because she had insisted on coming without a visible escort, even though everyone knew that human operatives were certainly hidden throughout the station. Emperor Kresh the Fourth studied the human woman across the table and tried to reconcile her calm professional demeanor with the species that had just demonstrated the ability to strike anywhere in Confederation space with impunity. "Captain Chun," Kresh began, "the Confederation is prepared to discuss terms, but we must first establish that you have the authority to speak for all human survivors, and we need proof that you can control your forces." Maya smiled slightly. "Your Majesty, 3 days ago, a Confederation supply convoy in the Deltros system was intercepted by human forces, and the convoy was carrying medical supplies destined for civilian populations, so we escorted it safely to its destination with our compliments." She pulled up a holographic display showing the convoy arriving intact with a message attached. "Humans target military assets, not civilians. We can strike or we can protect," Maya continued. "We can sabotage or we can cooperate, and which option you experience depends entirely on whether you negotiate in good faith." Chancellor Vreen of the Kelthros Dominion leaned forward. "You claim to want acknowledgement of wrongdoing and reparations and peace treaties. But your attacks have already killed Confederation personnel and destroyed valuable infrastructure, and those are acts of war." "Acts of war," Maya repeated, and her voice went cold. "Your fleets turned Earth into a radioactive wasteland and killed 9 billion civilians and hunted our evacuation ships like animals and enslaved our survivors in labor camps for 50 years. She stood and placed both hands on the table. "We hit 47 military facilities and evacuated civilians before destroying them, and we suffered our own losses rescuing those civilians because, unlike you, we value life even when it belongs to our enemies." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Senator Krath, who had opposed negotiations from the start, spoke up. "You speak of valuing life, but you've infiltrated our society with spies and saboteurs, and who knows how many you've killed to maintain your cover?" "Zero," Maya said flatly. "Human operatives have lived among you for 50 years using forged identities and genetic modifications and surgical alterations, and not once have we killed to protect our covers, because we're not trying to destroy you, and we're trying to make you acknowledge what you did and ensure it never happens again." She brought up another display showing footage from labor camps, where human prisoners had been worked to death in mining operations. "These are your camps where humans were enslaved, and we have documented every atrocity and every death and every violation of sentient rights, and we can release this to the galactic community and turn public opinion completely against the Confederation." "But you haven't," General Thrax observed. "Because we want justice, not revenge," Maya said. "We want the Confederation to admit wrongdoing and pay reparations and reform your policies. And if we just wanted to hurt you, we could have killed thousands in our initial attacks, but we chose not to." Emperor Kresh exchanged glances with his advisors and saw the same calculation. In their eyes, humanity was offering terms that were surprisingly reasonable given what had been done to them. "What exactly do your reparations entail?" Kresh asked. Maya outlined the proposal. Complete restoration of Earth's biosphere using Confederation terraforming technology, and return of all human prisoners from labor camps, and financial compensation for 50 years of forced labor and resources to rebuild human civilization. Additionally, Maya said, "We want the Confederation to establish new laws prohibiting genocide and species extinction as military policy, and any species that attempts to exterminate another will face immediate expulsion and economic sanctions and military intervention." "You're asking us to completely restructure Confederation law," Chancellor Vreen protested. "I'm asking you to be better," Maya replied. "The Confederation likes to present itself as civilized and advanced, but you destroyed an entire species because we expanded too quickly for your comfort, and that's not civilization, and that's barbarism dressed in diplomatic language." Senator Krath stood abruptly. "Your species challenged the galactic order and refused to accept limits, and you brought this on yourselves." Maya's expression hardened. "We built cities and developed technology and explored our own solar system, and for that you decided we deserved extinction. And if that's how the Confederation defines threat, then every species in the galaxy should be terrified of displeasing you." She swept her gaze across the assembled delegates. "But here's what you don't understand, and humanity wasn't special because we were better than other species. And we were special because when you tried to kill us, we refused to die, and we survived, and adapted and came back, and now we're offering you a choice." "What choice?" Emperor Kresh asked. "Acknowledge that trying to exterminate us was wrong and help us rebuild and reform your laws so this never happens to another species," Maya said, "or refuse and face a war that will never end because we have already proven we can hide among you and strike anywhere, and we have nothing to lose and unlimited patience." The conference chamber fell silent as the Confederation delegates absorbed the ultimatum. General Thrax was the first to speak. "If we agree to your terms, how do we know you won't continue attacks?" "Because unlike you, we keep our promises," Maya said. "The moment Earth is restored and reparations begin and the anti-genocide laws are enacted, we will stand down our military operations and our operatives throughout Confederation space will cease all hostile activities, but they'll remain in place." Thrax said. "Yes," Maya confirmed. "Think of them as insurance against backsliding, and if the Confederation honors its agreements, you'll never hear from them. And if you violate our treaty, you'll discover just how thoroughly we've infiltrated your society." Emperor Kresh sat back in his throne and considered the impossible situation 50 years ago. His grandfather had stood triumphant over humanity's defeat and declared the species extinct. And now the extinct species was dictating terms to the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. But the alternative was war against an enemy that had already demonstrated superior intelligence capabilities and apparently had sleeper agents positioned throughout Confederation territory and could strike critical infrastructure at will. "I need to consult with my government," Kresh said. "Take your time," Maya replied. "But understand that every day you delay is another day my people spend in your labor camps, and another day Earth remains a dead world, and my patience, while considerable, is not infinite." The conference adjourned, and Maya was escorted to private quarters, where she finally allowed herself to show the exhaustion she felt. A hidden panel in the wall slid open, and a young man emerged who looked like a Confederation maintenance worker, but moved with military precision. "How did it go, Captain?" he asked in English. "Hard to say, James," Maya replied. "They're scared and angry and backed into a corner, but also smart enough to recognize they don't have good options. Think they'll accept the terms. They don't have much choice." Maya said, "We hit them hard enough to prove we're dangerous, but showed enough restraint to prove we're not monsters. And now they have to decide if they want peace or war." James moved to the window that showed stars beyond the station. 50 years. He said quietly, "My parents spent their whole lives preparing for this moment, and they died before seeing it happen." "A lot of people did," Maya agreed. "But they died knowing that humanity would survive, and that's what matters." She joined him at the window. "When I was a child, my mother told me that humans are defined not by how we handle victory, but by how we handle defeat, and the Confederation thought they defeated US, but they just temporarily knocked us down, and now we're standing back up, and they're learning what that really means." 3 days later, Emperor Kresh returned to the conference table with his answer. "The Confederation accepts your terms," he said formally. "We acknowledge that the destruction of Earth was an unjust act that violated sentient rights, and we agree to full reparations and establishment of anti-genocide protocols." Maya felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 50 years. "Then we have an agreement, Your Majesty." The treaty was signed with elaborate ceremony and broadcast across the galaxy and species throughout. Confederation space watched as humanity emerged from extinction to reclaim their place among the stars. But some members of the Confederation were not happy with the agreement, and Senator Kraith returned to his homeworld and began quietly organizing resistance among hardline factions who refused to accept defeat. And the Zrathi military contained officers who believed their empire had shown weakness by negotiating with terrorists. These elements would soon discover that humanity's patience had limits, and that offering peace did not mean forgetting justice. The reckoning had only begun. The treaty lasted exactly 47 days before Senator Kraith made his move. Maya Chun was aboard Haven 7, coordinating the initial restoration efforts for Earth. When the emergency alerts began flooding her command console and reports came in from a dozen systems simultaneously. "Captain, we have a situation," her tactical officer, Lieutenant Sarah Park, reported, and the young woman's face was pale with shock. "The Zrathi Third Fleet just broke from Confederation Command and is moving toward Earth, and preliminary scans show they're preparing orbital bombardment weapons." Maya felt ice fill her veins because this was the scenario they had feared. Hardline elements refusing to accept peace and attempting to finish what their ancestors started. "How many ships?" Maya demanded. 73 capital vessels plus support craft. Park replied, "It's nearly a quarter of the Zrathi military, and they're under command of Admiral Voss, who apparently believes the Empire made a mistake by negotiating. Get me aligned to Emperor Kresh immediately," Maya ordered, and activate Protocol Omega across all human forces. Within minutes, Maya was speaking to the Zrathi Emperor, whose 4 eyes showed genuine distress. Captain Chun, I want you to know that Admiral Voss is acting without authorization, and the Confederation government condemns his actions absolutely, and we are mobilizing loyal forces to intercept his fleet. With respect, Your Majesty, your forces won't reach Earth in time, Maya said. Admiral, Voss will arrive in 72 hours, and we cannot allow him to complete another genocide attempt. What are you planning to do? Kresh asked, and there was fear in his voice. What we should have done 50 years ago, Maya replied. We're going to ensure that no one ever doubts humanity's ability to defend itself. She terminated the connection and turned to her crew. Send the activation codes to all operatives and all ships and all hidden assets across Zrathi space, and it's time to show them what we've really been building. Across the galaxy, human sleeper agents received their orders and began executing a plan 50 years in the making on Zrath Prime, a mild-mannered data analyst named Michael Torres, who had worked in the Imperial Palace for 30 years, walked into the central computer core and inserted a data chip that gave humanity complete access to every Zrathi military communication. A freight dock supervisor named Jennifer Kim activated hidden weapons caches that human engineers had been slowly assembling inside Confederation shipyards for decades, and in the darkness beyond Zrathi, sensor-range 20 massive warships that humanity had been constructing in secret powered up their engines and set course for Earth. These were not the ships that had fought in humanity's first war, and these were vessels designed with 50 years of stolen Confederation technology and refined by human ingenuity and built with one purpose: ensure that humanity never faced extinction again. Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of his flagship Retribution and watched Earth grow larger on his view screen and smiled because he was about to correct his Empire's greatest mistake. Admiral, we're detecting multiple unknown signatures emerging from the asteroid belt, his sensor officer reported. Probably human survivors trying to flee. Voss said dismissively, ignore them and maintain course to Earth. Sir, the signatures are massive, and these aren't evacuation ships, and they're reading as capital-class warships. Voss turned to look at the tactical display and felt his confidence waver as 20 huge vessels took up defensive positions around Earth, and each one was larger than any ship in his fleet. What are those? He demanded. His answer came as every communication channel filled with a single transmission, a human woman's voice speaking with absolute authority. Admiral Voss, this is Fleet Commander Maya Chun of the Human Defense Force, and you are hereby ordered to stand down and retreat from Sol System immediately. Voss laughed. You think 20 ships can stop my entire fleet and surrender now, and I might show mercy? Those aren't the only ships you should worry about, Admiral, Maya replied. Voss's tactical officer made a choking sound. Sir, I'm reading weapons signatures from inside our own fleet, and multiple vessels are showing human transponder codes, and Admiral, we have infiltrators. Impossible, Voss said. We secured our ships personally. Then 17 ships in his own fleet suddenly changed their identification codes to human designations and turned their weapons toward their former companions. Explanation, Voss roared. Those are captured Zrathi vessels that we've been operating for decades. Maya's voice said calmly, your engineers built them, and your officers commanded them, and your crews maintained them, and never once suspected that key personnel were human operatives who slowly replaced entire crews over time. She paused. Did you really think we spent 50 years doing nothing but hiding? Voss stared at the tactical display showing his fleet, now divided between loyal Zrathi vessels and human-controlled ships, and the 20 massive human warships waiting in defensive formation. You're bluffing, Voss said. You won't fire on us because it would restart the war. You already restarted the war when you violated the treaty, Maya replied. But I'm giving you one chance to end this without bloodshed and stand down, Admiral. And return to Zrathi space and face justice for your actions. I refuse to surrender to animals, Voss snarled. Then you've made your choice, Maya said. All human forces engage defensive protocols, and priority is protecting Earth, but minimize Zrathi. Casualties where possible. What followed was not a battle but a demonstration. The human warships moved with precision that shouldn't be possible for vessels their size and their weapons carved through Zrathi shields like they were paper, and their defensive systems absorbed incoming fire without apparent damage. But more terrifying was how they fought. They targeted engines and weapons and life support with surgical precision and disabled ships without destroying them and forced crews to evacuate before finishing vessels off. Admiral Voss watched in horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled and his crews rescued by the very humans he had come to exterminate. Within 6 hours it was over, and his flagship was the only vessel still combat capable, and even that was surrounded by human ships with weapons locked on. This is impossible, Voss said to the empty bridge because his crew had already evacuated. Humanity was defeated and broken and scattered. Maya Chun's face appeared on his view screen, and she looked tired but determined. That's what you forgot, Admiral, and you forgot that broken things can be repaired and scattered things can be gathered, and defeated things can learn from their mistakes and come back stronger. She leaned forward. You thought destroying Earth would end us, but Earth was never what made us human, and we're human because we survive and adapt and never give up, no matter how impossible the odds. So kill me then, Voss said bitterly. Finish your revenge. I'm not going to kill you, Admiral, Maya said. You're going to stand trial for violating the treaty and attempting genocide, and you're going to spend the rest of your life remembering that you tried to destroy humanity and failed just like everyone else who tried. She gestured, and a boarding party began cutting through his hull. Take him alive, Maya ordered. He's going to be an example on Zrath Prime Emperor. Kresh watched the battle's conclusion and felt something inside him fundamentally change. He had agreed to the treaty because he feared human sabotage capabilities, but he hadn't truly understood what humanity had become until watching them dismantle a Zrathi fleet while minimizing casualties and protecting the very world his species had tried to destroy. Get me Captain Chun, he ordered. When Maya's face appeared, she looked exhausted, but there was steel in her eyes. Your Majesty, she said formally. Captain Chun, I owe you an apology, Kresh said when we negotiated. I thought we were dealing with desperate refugees who had gotten lucky with infiltration and sabotage. But I was wrong. Yes, you were, Maya agreed. You weren't dealing with refugees, and you were dealing with a species that spent 50 years preparing for every possible scenario, including members of your own military violating the treaty. She pulled up a display showing human assets throughout Confederation space. We have operatives in every major government and agents in every military branch, and control of critical infrastructure across hundreds of worlds, and we could have used this to conquer you, but we chose peace instead. Why? Kresh asked genuinely. Because we remember what it's like to face extinction, Maya said. We remember the fear and desperation and helplessness, and we won't inflict that on another species, no matter what they did to us. She paused. But we also remember what it's like to be underestimated and dismissed and attacked. And we will never allow ourselves to be that vulnerable again. What do you want from us now? Kresh asked. The same thing we wanted before, Maya replied. Honor the treaty and help us rebuild Earth and establish laws preventing genocide, and never forget what happens when you try to exterminate humanity. Kresh nodded slowly. You have my word, and the Confederation will honor our agreement, and Admiral Voss will face justice, and the restoration of Earth will proceed immediately.